By late August, the catmint you loved in June has split open like a dropped pie. The violet salvia spikes have gone brown and brittle, and that proud, hardy geranium has flattened into a donut of floppy stems around a bald center. It looks finished, and every instinct says to leave a struggling plant alone in the heat. But part that tired top with your hand and check the crown. A ring of fresh green shoots is already pushing up from the base. That collapsed top is doing the opposite of protecting them. It smothers the light they need. Here is what is happening inside that plant, and it changes how you read every tired mound in your border. Through June and early July, the plant pours everything it has into flowering. Every stem tip carries a spent bloom, and each of those tips sends a chemical signal down the stem that says, "Stop, do not sprout below me. The flowering is handled up here." Plantsmen call that apical dominance, but you do not need the term. You just need to know that the tired, flopped top is actively holding down the fresh growth underneath it. Meanwhile, the plant reads all those fading flowers as its cue to set seed and coast toward dormancy. It is shutting down for the year, and it is only August. It helps to think of the plant's summer as one fixed budget of energy, spent on ripening ahead of seed. That budget is gone for the season with nothing to show but brown pods. Redirected by a well-timed cut, the same budget buys you fresh foliage and a whole second round of flowers instead. Now watch what happens the moment you shear that spent mound off in a single pass. You cut every one of those suppressing tips at once, so the signal stops. All the waiting buds at the base release together, which is exactly why the regrowth comes in so fast and so even. On most of these plants, you will see fresh green foliage within a week, sometimes within days, and on many of them, a real second flush of flowers in 2 to 4 weeks. Because the plant breaks from dozens of points at once instead of a few tired tips, it often comes back fuller and denser than the first. So cutting the top off is not damage, it is release. It took me an embarrassingly long time to trust that. For years, I would stand over a flopping catmint with the shears in my hand and lose my nerve because taking a living plant down by half in 90-degree heat feels like an act of violence. So I would snip a few brown bits, tell myself I'd done something useful and walk away. And every September without fail, I got the same reward, a sad hollow mound with a dead middle and nothing left to give. The summer I finally shut my eyes and took the whole thing down to 6 inches was the summer my border stopped dying in September and started blooming twice. Before we get to the 7, one word about the cut itself, because how you do it matters almost as much as which plant you do it to. This is a job for hedge shears or a good sharp pair of one-hand shears, not for picking away bloom by bloom with little snips. Work in the cool of the early morning or the evening rather than the blazing middle of the day, so the plant is not losing water through a fresh wound in full sun. Make a clean, decisive sweep across the whole mound at the height I give you for each plant, and resist the urge to fuss it into a perfect ball. And here is one detail that saves you real grief later. That tired late summer top you are cutting off is often carrying a dusting of powdery mildew or leaf spot. So bag it and bin it rather than folding it into the compost heap, where those spores will happily overwinter and come back to greet you next spring. There is one more thing your nerve has to get through, so let me warn you now. For about a week after any of these cuts, the plant looks worse than it did before you started, all stubble and bare crown and regret. That is the moment a gardener panics and swears the plant is dead. It is not, though I understand the fear. That ugly week is the plant pulling everything downward into the roots and the basal buds before it pushes back up. Give it 7 days and a good drink of water before you pass any judgment on it. There is also a distinction here that decides whether you get a true second act or just a slightly neater version of the same dying plant. Deadheading means snipping off the individual spent flowers, one bloom at a time. It tidies the plant and it can nudge a few more blooms out of it, but it leaves the whole tired framework of old stems and old leaves standing. Cutting back hard is a different animal. You take the shears to the entire mound and bring it down to that fresh basal growth in one pass, spent flowers and worn foliage, and all. Deadheading grooms, cutting back rebuilds. When I talk about forcing a second flush on the 7 plants coming up, I mean the shears, not the snips. If you've gardened a while, you may know the Chelsea chop, that late spring trim named after the London Flower Show, where you shorten a plant before it blooms to keep it compact and hold the flowers back a little. What we are doing in August is its late season cousin, the same cut aimed at a different prize. There you are, trading a little height off the first flush. Here you are buying a whole fresh flush of flowers after the first has burned out. The plants that take well to the spring chop are largely the same ones that reward the cut now. So which plants pay you back for that brave cut? These 7 repay it faster and more reliably than anything else in a sunny border, and I will give you the exact height to cut each one and what to expect after you do. Number 1 is catmint, the fastest payoff on this whole list. Picture a mature nepeta like Walker's Low back in June, a soft cloud of lavender blue flowers foaming over silver green leaves, honeybees working every spike. By August, that same plant has usually flung itself wide open from the center, gone grey and stemmy, and sprawled over its neighbours with a hole opening up right in the middle. Take your hedge shears and cut the whole mound back by half, down to about 6 inches from the soil. For a week, it will sit there as a low hedgehog of pale stubs. Then the silver-green regrowth creeps up over the stubs, and within 2 to 3 weeks you have a tidy dome back in full lavender blue bloom that carries clean into October. The hard cut also clears out any powdery mildew that has crept into the old leaves, so the fresh dome comes back clean. And the fall flush is the one the bees swarm hardest, late in the year when little else is open for them. Number 2 is perennial salvia, the woodland sages like caradonna and May-night. Those upright violet spikes are the backbone of the early border. But by late June, they brown from the bottom up, go woody and skeletal, and no amount of staring at them brings the color back. You have 2 ways to cut. If you want to be precise, follow each spent spike down to the fresh low leaves at the base of the plant and cut it there. If the whole clump just looks dusty and done, shear the lot to 3 or 4 inches above the crown and be finished with it. Clearing that woody spent framework out also opens the plant to air and light, which keeps the new basal rosette healthy. New spikes push from the base within about a month and run right through September, and caradonna in particular sends up a second set of those inky, near-black stems that seem to glow when the low autumn light catches them sideways across the border. If you cut only the spent spikes and leave the fresh green rosette below untouched, you keep a little foliage working while the new flowers build, which some gardeners prefer over shearing the whole clump flat. Number 3 is the hardy geranium, the true perennial cranesbill. And I need to be clear about which plant I mean here. This is not the tender bedding pelarganium in the summer, hanging baskets that everyone loosely calls a geranium. The real cranesbill is a different creature entirely, the Roseanne and Johnson's blue types, low ground covering mounds of saucer-shaped blue-violet flowers that ramble through the front of a border. Now, those 2 behave a little differently, and it is worth knowing which you have. Johnson's blue gives you a glorious few weeks of clear blue flowers in early summer, then stops, and it is the type that reblooms beautifully from a hard cut. Roseanne is the longest blooming hardy geranium there is, a sterile hybrid that never sets seed and so never quite knows when to quit, and in a hot, dry August it tends to just pause and hold its energy rather than die. Either way, the treatment is the same. By late summer, a plant like Roseanne looks like someone sat down hard on it, the trailing stems splayed out flat in a wide ring around a bare, worn-out heart. Do not be gentle with it. Gather the whole thing up in one hand and cut it right down to the crown, because the new shoots are already coming up through the soil under all that mess as fat reddish nubs. It regreens within about 2 weeks. The flowers come back on fresh growth as the weather cools, and honestly, it returns tidier and better behaved than it was before you touched it. Number 4 is yarrow, and yarrow tells you exactly when it is ready. Through early summer, those flat, plated flower heads sit up proud over ferny grey-green foliage in butter yellow or brick red or soft chalk white. Then by midsummer, the stems turn woody, brittle and top-heavy, and the first real thunderstorm flattens the whole plant into a tangle across its neighbors. When it reaches that stage, stop trying to prop it up with stakes. Cut the whole plant down by a good half, right to the low basal rosette or to a healthy side shoot where you can see green. Fresh ferny growth returns within days in full sun, and a second flush of those flat plates follows a few weeks behind it. If your yarrow flops for you year after year, that is usually a sign of soil that is too rich or a spot that is too shaded, because yarrow is a lean, dry soil prairie plant at heart, and that fact matters a great deal for how you feed it afterward, which I will come back to in a minute. Number 5 is coreopsis, the threadleaf tick seed especially, the kind that makes a knee-high haze of small golden or lemon yellow stars over fine, almost needle-like foliage. It flowers so generously through early summer that it simply exhausts itself, and by August, the mound goes brown and thin and stops producing, studded with hundreds of tiny spent seed heads. Trying to deadhead a threadleaf coreopsis flower by flower is a fool's errand, and I have burned whole summer evenings proving it to myself. Just shear the tired mound back by a third to a half with your hedge shears, give it a good drink, and it rebuilds into a fresh green cushion and reblooms cleanly for a long second run into fall. The threadleaf types like Moonbeam and Zagreb are the real champions of this trick, coming back as fresh mounds that flower right up to frost. This is the one plant where a blunt shearing beats fiddly deadheading so completely that I stopped snipping it years ago and never looked back. It also resents being crowded and shaded, so if yours sulks after a cut, thin its pushy neighbors and let the light back down onto the crown. Number 6 is lady's mantle, Alchemilla mollis, the plant with those scalloped, softly pleated leaves that cup a bead of rain like a drop of mercury after a storm. In early summer, it throws up a froth of tiny chartreuse flowers that designers adore for softening the hard edge of a path or a step. But once that lime green haze fades to a dull, papery beige, the whole plant slumps and the foliage goes tired, yellowed and floppy at the edges. Cut it right to the ground, the entire plant. Leaves and spent flower froth together in one go. Fresh, mounded leaves come back quickly, and there is a quiet bonus to cutting it now rather than later. You strip off all those seed heads before they ripen and scatter, which stops lady's mantle from sowing itself into every crack and gravel joint in the garden, and believe me, it will colonize the whole path, and the neighbors too, if you let it. If you love the pleated leaves and only want the faded flowers gone, you can shear just the flowering stems instead, but taking the whole plant to the ground gives you the freshest new mound by far. Number 7 is really a pair because they want the same treatment and the same timing. Dianthus, the cottage pinks like firewitch with their electric magenta flowers over blue-grey grassy tufts, and spike veronica, those slim vertical candles of blue or rose held above neat low foliage. Both put on a strong early summer show and quit soon after, leaving bare spent stems standing over the low leaves. Shear both back once that first fades, taking firewitch lightly down to the fresh blue-grey cushion and the veronica down to its low leaves. Spike veronica in particular can pick up mildew on its tired foliage late in summer, and a hard shear clears that away and brings back clean growth along with the flowers. You get a real second flowering out of both in September and October, and firewitch will keep scattering those hot pink flowers over its silvery mat right up until the first hard frost shuts it down. That is the full 7, and each one is a second act you already own. No replanting and nothing new to buy. The Flower Gardener's Bible, the book cover on your screen, lays out the full cutback calendar for all 38. By Hardiness Zone, $9 at bloomerelay.co. Now, before you grab the shears and go to work, there is one correction that matters more than the entire list above, and the quick listicles bury it at the bottom or leave it out completely. The month on the calendar is not what decides whether this works. Your first frost is. Every one of these cuts forces soft, new growth, and that growth needs roughly 6 weeks to mature and harden off before your first hard frost arrives. So do not think of this as an August job. Think of it as a 6-week job. Say your average first hard frost lands in early October. Count back 6 weeks, and you are looking at the third week of August as your outer limit, which means a cut in the first week or two of the month gives that new growth real time to firm up. If you are not sure of your date, your regional extension office or a simple frost date map will give you the local average, and it pays to know your own microclimate on top of that. A bed tucked against a warm south-facing wall runs a week or two later into fall than an open, exposed border, and that little margin can be what a late cut needs to survive. And be clear about what you are counting toward. A hard frost, the kind that blackens foliage, usually means 4 or more hours below freezing, not the first light nip that silvers the lawn and burns off by 9 in the morning. It is that hard frost you count back 6 weeks from. Plants in pots complicate this because a container dries out and heats up far faster than open ground. So if you are shearing perennials in pots, water them well the day before, cut them a touch less hard, and give them a shadier corner for a couple of days while they find their feet. In the middle zones, 6 and 7, early August is your last safe window for most of these. In the coldest zones, 3, 4, and 5 shift many of these cuts back into July instead, because a hard cutback in late August up north pushes tender shoots that never harden off, and the first frost turns them to blackened mush. You spend the plant's stored energy for nothing and lose the current foliage on top of it. Down in the warm zones, 8 and 9, you have the most room of anyone. You get a comfortable second flush, and you can often coax a light third round out of catmint and salvia with a second, gentler trim a few weeks on. A gardener in Vermont and a gardener in Georgia should never be cutting on the same weekend, no matter what a thumbnail tells them. 2 more things make or break the regrowth, and both are easy to get wrong. The first is water. A plant that is trying to push new growth in August heat with half its foliage suddenly gone is in a fragile spot, and if the soil underneath it is bone dry, that plant will stall or fail outright. So the moment you finish cutting, give it a long, slow, deep drink right at the base and keep the soil from drying out completely while the new shoots come up. Keep half an eye on that tender growth for the first week or so too, because soft summer regrowth can pull in aphids, and a firm blast from the hose knocks them off before they ever settle in. A thin scatter of compost around the base after cutting feeds the soil and helps hold that moisture. But keep any thick bark mulch off the crown itself, because a heavy mulch smothers the very basal shoots you are trying so hard to wake up. A freshly sheared perennial sitting in dry August soil is the single most common way this whole thing goes wrong. The second rule catches people off guard. Skip the fertilizer, especially on catmint and yarrow. Those are lean soil plants by nature, built for poor dry ground, and a shot of rich nitrogen straight after cutting makes the new growth soft, leggy, and floppy, which undoes the exact tidy mound you were cutting to create in the first place. You end up with a lush green plant that flops wide open again within a month, right back where you started. Feed your roses and your dahlias if you like, but let these lean ones rebuild in the poor, dry soil they came from. And whatever you cut, always cut to just above fresh green growth, never down into bare woody stems. If you drop below the green into old wood, there is nothing left there to resprout from, and the plant will simply sit and sulk, or die back on you altogether. One last designer's habit worth stealing. Do not cut all 7 of these on the same afternoon, or your whole border drops to bare stubble at once and looks bombed for a fortnight. Stagger the cuts across a week or two, a plant here and a plant there, so there is always something in flower carrying the show while its neighbors rebuild underneath. But here is the part that matters most, because that flat cut it back in August advice will quietly ruin some of your best plants. There is a simple test for whether a plant belongs on the cutting list at all. If it flowered back in June or July, and you can find fresh green shoots down at its base, it will almost certainly rebloom from a hard cut. But if it is covered in fat, unopened buds in August, it is a fall bloomer building its whole show, and the shears stay in the shed. There are 4 kinds of perennials you must leave standing, and if you shear these now, you will erase the finest part of your whole autumn. The first group is the fall bloomers, the plants that are busy loading up their entire show for September and October while everything around them fades. Asters covered in tight little buds, goldenrod with its yellow plumes still building. Japanese anemones swaying on tall, wiry stems, garden mums fattening up, and the flat broccoli-like heads of autumn joy sedum shifting slowly from pale green to dusty rose. Cut any of these in August and you throw away the one show they exist to give you. That sedum head that looks unfinished today is going to be the richest rust-red thing in the whole October border, standing there stiff and coppery and covered in the last butterflies of the year. And do not let anyone talk you into pulling the goldenrod either. It has been blamed for hay fever for generations, but that is a case of mistaken identity because goldenrod's pollen is heavy and sticky and carried from flower to flower by insects, not by the wind. The real culprit is the ragweed blooming beside it at the same time. Your goldenrod is among the last great nectar bars open for bees and migrating butterflies in October, so let those golden plumes stand. The second group is the woody sub-shrubs, and this is where a careless August cut can genuinely kill a plant stone dead. Lavender and Russian sage, the perovskia with its hazy blue late spires, both look like soft perennials, but they build on a permanent woody framework low down at the base. Cut them hard back into that old wood this late in the year, and you strip the crown protection they need to carry through winter, and they may never break bud for you again. These get a light shaping in spring, once you actually see fresh new growth breaking along the stems, and never a hard chop in the heat of late summer. I killed a beautiful old lavender learning that exact lesson the hard way, so please learn it from me for free instead. The third group is the seedhead and winter structure plants, and leaving these standing is one of the kindest things you can do for the living creatures sharing your garden. Coneflowers with their dark, spiky central cones, black-eyed Susans, and the ornamental grasses that catch and hold the frost. Those seed heads feed the birds straight through the cold months, and that is not a vague garden nicety. American goldfinches and dark-eyed juncos work the coneflower and rudbeckia heads all winter, cracking out the seed when the ground is frozen and little else is on offer. The hollow and pithy stems become quiet winter shelter for overwintering native bees, the small solitary kind that tuck themselves down inside a dry stem to sleep through to spring. And the frosted seed heads and pale grass plumes are what carry the whole border through the dead months, catching the low golden winter light, swaying in a January wind, holding a rime of frost on a still morning. There is a plain, practical reason to leave the grasses standing too, beyond how lovely they look in the frost. Cut a grass down hard going into a wet winter and rainwater pools in the open, hollow crown and can rot it out, whereas a standing tuft sheds the rain and keeps its own base dry until spring. Cut all of that down in late winter, right before the new spring growth breaks, and not a single day before. The fourth one is less a group than a caution for cold climate gardeners. If you are up north and a perennial sits right at the ragged edge of its hardiness, leave its spent top growth standing through winter on purpose. That old foliage traps a blanket of snow and a pocket of still insulating air over the crown, and it can be the difference between a marginal plant that wakes up in spring and one that does not. The tidy instinct that says clear every bed down to bare soil before winter is working flat against you in the coldest zones. So that late August collapse across your border only looks like the season ending. For the right 7 plants, it is a starting gun, and one brave cut buys you a fresh flush of catmint blue, salvia violet, and cranesbill saucers exactly when the rest of the garden is checking out for the year. The whole skill lives in knowing which 7 to shear and which 4 to leave standing, so that come October your border reads as intentional and alive instead of exhausted and brown. That is the real difference between a garden that peaks once in June and a garden that quietly delivers twice. Go and part the top of one tired plant this week and find that ring of green waiting for you at the base. Once you have seen it with your own eyes, you will never leave a collapsed perennial to rot into September again. If you want more of the plant by plant, zone by zone timing that keeps a border alive deep into the fall, subscribe and I will keep them coming your way, one honest cut at a time.